So I'd like to call to order the June 9th, 2023 meeting of the Economic Development Commission, and it's approximately 1:05 p.m. And I think the first thing we need to do is roll call. So, Dee, could you do the honor?
For me to start? Or
Well, just, somebody has to keep, who keeps notes here?
Oh, yes, I will be keeping notes for
Okay.
sure, yes.
All right. So,
All right.
Here.
Vanessa McClary here.
Thank you.
Kurt Zorn, I'm present.
Great.
Staff president, yeah.
Alex Crowley, Department of Economic and Sustainable Development.
Dee Del Rosa, AD of Small Business Development.
Larry Allen, legal.
And people in the
Stephen Lucas, I'm the council administrator and attorney at the Common Council Office.
Clark Griner, Bloomington Economic Development Corporation. I'm the Business Development Director.
Dave Haskins, B Square Bulletin.
Lisa Rivas, ESD intern.
All right. You guys don't have to introduce yourself. If you'd like to, go ahead. All right. We're going to have reading of the minutes, so I'm not sure what that means. Are you going to read the minutes to us from Vanessa? Is that it?
How about move we approve the minutes from October 18th, 2022, June 15th, 2022, February 15th, 2022, January 31st, 2022, and December 23rd, 2021.
Thank you, Jeff.
Second. I'll second that.
I like that reading of the minutes.
That's as far as the reading is going to go.
That's good. Thank you. All right. So
We did not have to acknowledge each one individually, did we?
Unless there's any changes to each individual,
Okay,
does
that's
anybody have any
And
changes?
Larry, you did say that it's okay for people to vote who were not present.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Including myself, and anybody opposed? All right. So, we're going to turn to new business. And we're going to talk about electing officers.
I'm going to throw that over to Larry, honestly.
Okay, we could do this by slate. So traditionally, you all have had a president, a vice president, and a secretary. So that's what you'd be electing. Currently, Commissioner Zorn is the president. I believe that, I'm sorry.
Webb.
I think it's
Yes, Malcolm is vice president. Or is Malcolm secretary, actually? And then Malcolm maybe
Malcolm is secretary.
secretary. And then Jeff, I believe you're the vice president this time around, right? Because it was like Commissioner McClary, and then now it's Malcolm.
Yes.
So you can vote if you'd like to approve the same slate. You could move, but if we'd like to take it individual offices, we can also do that. And we need to have a nomination of somebody for the office, and then vote on the slate.
I'll move that we keep the same slate of officers.
Thank you.
Second.
All right. Any discussion?
Only if some's coming from you, I guess.
You want to discuss this?
No,
Alex?
I was just saying, I appreciate you being willing to serve again. That's helpful.
I guess we need to vote on this, so. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? I think we have officers.
We have another.
Matt, we just elected officers.
Terrific.
So,
My
He
plan is
timed it. I was going to say he timed it.
President Flaherty.
No, see? They waited outside.
waiting until we elected officers. There you go.
We still, yeah.
By the
I
way,
missed my chance
you
to
were
campaign.
president, vice president, and
Yeah,
secretary
perfect.
because you were late.
There you go. Hey, I was talking to a guy in a Mini Cooper in your break.
So just for purposes of the minutes, we should note that Commissioner Webb and Flaherty have shown up.
That's right.
For the record.
And we are on number B, or letter B of new business, which is the annual EDC activity and tax abatement compliance report. And Dee, I want to thank you for the extra work you did to get this finished in time that we could have the meeting this week.
It was fun.
I'm sure it was. I was thinking about you.
Well, I appreciate everyone's patience on getting the meeting set up and everyone being here today to go through this rigorous process of going through tax abatements. And I'm going to let Alex and so our colleague Adam kind of open up the proceedings.
So echoing that, thank you, sorry for the glitches in the previous meeting. This is Dee's first time. She's done a really good job pulling stuff together. She's going to do most of the presentation, but I wanted to add a couple things before we got going. So the first is just to kind of reiterate the importance of this task. It seems like kind of a rote, annual thing that we do, but just to be clear, the reason we do it, and underlying this presentation is that we really, it's important for the community to know and for all of us to be part of the process of taking care of and protecting public investments, right? So there's a lot of public investments, as you'll see, that have been made to help stimulate some of the projects, whether they're housing or commercial projects. And we'll let Adam Stone from Stone Municipal speak a little bit more about what he's seen around in the state. But I think bottom line is we do a pretty good job, and especially relative to some other communities, in terms of being very meticulous and looking at these on an annual basis, analyzing them, making determinations, and then ultimately bringing them to council. And that's not a small thing, and it's kind of important to reiterate that because sometimes we can kind of gloss over that. So in view of that, this year, for the first time, at least in my time at the city, we thought it might be helpful to bring on a third party to help us. And the reason we wanted to do it is not because we felt like there was any necessary flaw in how we were doing it, but we felt like having a third party with another set of eyes would be particularly helpful. There's some complexity to some of these tax abatements. We'll talk about the Catalan situation specifically, but just, even though tax abatements are not brain surgery, it's somewhat complex, and we wanted to make sure that we had kind of expertise that knows how to do this, has done it in other communities, bring their perspective. And so we tapped Stone Municipal, and we'll let Adam introduce himself. But we brought them on not only to go through the process of this analysis and the 2020, just making sure that when we are providing recommendations, they are solid, someone else has double-checked our work. We also think there's an opportunity, and we will work with them in the future to dig deeper. So just one example of where we think that there's areas to tighten. When we present a tax abatement to you and then ultimately to council and it's approved, there are a lot of assumptions actually that go into it. There's an assumption about what the actual investment's going to be. I mean, they are providing us information about that. There's an assumption about what that capital investment is going to turn into when it becomes true assessed value, right? And we just use kind of rules of thumb as a way to try to value what the tax abatement will be over time. That's a fixed point, a fixed data point at the time we do the analysis, but actually it's a variable data point in reality. An assessed value changes over time. The other thing that changes over time is the tax rate. And so even though we say, okay, under today's tax rate, here's a capital investment, here's an assumption of what assessed value, therefore ultimately, X times Y equals Z, and Z is the value of the tax abatement. The reality is you've got a lot of moving parts, and those are continuously being updated over time. So we think that there's an added layer of sophistication that we can get to, which is to not only read out to you on an annual basis, hey, are these tax abatements compliant, but also what is the true public investment that's been made against tax rates, against assessed value, and therefore the value of the tax abatement versus what we thought at the time, right? And in some cases it's more, in some cases it's less, because it really comes down to how the assessment is made. But we think that if we can get to that level of sophistication, we'll play at a pretty high level relative to how we analyze this stuff. So anyway, that's kind of a future phase of working with Stone. Why don't I turn it over to Adam Stone of Stone Municipal. If Adam, if you could maybe introduce the company, yourself, and any thoughts that you have.
Yeah, sure. And everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for letting us join virtually today. Good afternoon and happy Friday. So that was an outstanding intro, Alex. I appreciate that. So I started this in 2016. It has grown pretty, very grateful for that. We've now worked with communities across the country. We're actively in 3 different states. And all of that actually grew up just down the road from you all in 46. I grew up in Columbus, Indiana, went to Columbus North, and really in 2012 started my career as the city controller for Greenwood, Indiana. That's where I got my IU degree in accounting and finance, got the CPA in 2016, and then have just been really dedicated my entire career to local government finance. As a practice, we specialize on the financial side on economic development projects for local governments. So we have an expertise on tax abatements, incentives, redevelopment, and really anything that goes into making these public-private partnerships a possibility. So we specialize on that on the front end, which also gives us a really unique lens into the compliance requirements within the state of Indiana, specifically around tax abatements, incentives, developer purchase bonds, et cetera. So I think it was just a natural fit when we first started talking to Alex and Dee. I can leave you with a couple things that we're excited about, and then I want to make sure to be concise. The first is, we're gonna, as an independent CPA, that's one aspect. The second is we are a registered municipal advisory firm with the Securities and Exchange Commission and with FINRA. So why I say that is because that requires us to have a fiduciary standard as a practice. So we have to provide non-biased, independent review for our clients, and I think that's going to be really important. When you get into tax credits, tax abatements, there's a lot of relationships and there's a lot of aspects. So I think our role within Dee and Alex and your team is just to try to provide you all that non-biased third-party review to try to help make sure, and then where helpful, bring how other communities have handled this, how the state has intended to it to be tracked, et cetera. As we go into the next phase of this, we do believe that there's going to be a lot of policy recommendations and data-driven decisions that we can provide as findings and results, and I think that's only going to help Bloomington and your group make better proposals and better opportunities in the future. And then lastly, I just want to say that in the short time that we've worked with Bloomington, specifically Dee and Alex, I think that you're all ahead of the curve already. So when you add in this layer of deeper analysis, refinement, getting the data solid, I think it's only going to help your community continue to grow, continue to compete, and get even more fine-tuned in how you think about these, how you offer these in the future. So we're very grateful and honored to be a part of the team and look forward to helping serve in your community. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions?
At the moment, until we see the
Great.
presentation.
So just to ground ourselves here, hard stops. Is there a time that people need to leave so we can kind of speed this, or, okay.
Okay.
What's that? 7 o'clock, okay, so we'll try to.
Yeah, I have something. I have
Yeah, I was just saying, the library open house ends at 7, so.
Yeah.
Although I won't be here
Before 6.
We're close to 6 o'clock, I guarantee.
I didn't think it'd go that long.
Okay. Let's see. Yep, get that out of the way.
Trying to run the plane while you.
That would be lovely if you would do that for me. I appreciate it. So once again, thank you all for being here today. I appreciate it. I'm Dee De La Rosa, the Assistant Director for Small Business Development for the City of Bloomington, and I'm here to present the annual tax abatement compliance and EDC activity report for 2022. Once again, we would like to thank Stone Municipal Group for their partnership with ESD. We anticipate a continued partnership with Stone to aid us in monitoring current and future abatements and have a thorough understanding of the overall impact of this incentive program. Today we're going to cover several things, including the overview of the compliance review process, evaluation of criteria, the economic impact of the city's active abatements, and specific details of residential, commercial, and not yet active abatements. We'll conclude with a summary of the Commission's other 22 activity, and after the presentation, our staff and Adam will still be here to address any questions you may have. Let's see. And we will also be open to any public comment or any public questions. Then you may recommend to vote the report to council, and if it is approved, we'll present the same report to the Common Council next week on Wednesday, June 14th. Slide 3. Okay. All right, yep. The annual reporting process compares the taxpayers' commitments from the initial statement of benefits to self-reported results on the annual compliance form, or CF1. The taxpayer submits a CF1 by May 15th to the county auditor and the city clerk. The council has assigned the Department of Economic and Sustainable Development responsible for compiling and reporting to EDC. The EDC forwards the report, ESD forwards the final report to council for any action. The EDC, next.
I got you.
Okay, sorry. The EDC recommends approval for new applications. The Common Council authorizes and the county administers the abatements. The City of Bloomington general standards for the tax abatement program require the creation of capital investment and one of the following: an increase in full-time, permanent, living wage jobs, an increase to existing wages, or the creation of affordable housing units. Other evaluation criteria considered during the application process are quality of life and environmental sustainability, affordable housing, community service, or community character, which refers specifically to art, local business, or historic preservation. ESD receives an application and the statement of benefits to authorize a new tax abatement. If the application and the SB1 meet the review criteria, ESD brings the application to the EDC. The EDC then recommends it to council for the approval of an ERA, or economic revitalization area, as well as an abatement term and schedule. The Common Council has a two-step process. It reviews the staff memo, the EDC resolution, and supporting documents before approving a designated solution. It then holds a public hearing and approves, if applicable, an affirmative resolution. If an abatement is approved, it allows for the phase-in of property taxes on new assessed value. The term of abatement on real property is 1 to 10 years, and the term on personal property may go up to 20 years. The designating body either approves a set abatement schedule or approves an alternative deduction schedule. Slide 8 compares actual investment against proposed investment on the original SB1 forms by type of abatement. You can see that the total accrual investment was $32.1 million over the proposed investment. As you can see the difference at the very bottom.
Can you clarify what the DNF means?
That is did not file.
Okay, thank you.
These abatements have added and retained 3,227 jobs with an average 2022 salary of $56,305.
Oh, and I'm sorry, on the slide before that,
Mm-hmm.
on the DNF. Mm-hmm. So have you listed that as DNF because of the urban station not filing? Is that?
Yes.
And so I can't remember, are they the only mixed use, or are there others?
I believe so. They are the only ones. Yes.
Okay, so that's why it's DNF. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
We can go to the next slide.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. So the total assessed value of abatement projects for 2022 is $122 million, give or take. This is a map of all the abatements covered in this report. The green pins designate real property and personal property is in yellow. The Catalent abatement has multiple abatements tied to the same address, so they're kind of stacked on each other, but trust me, there are green pins underneath that.
Hey, just if we can go back to the previous slide for a second, I see a 0 for commercial personal property. You're gonna dig down and tell us what's driving that?
Yes.
Yes.
Because we have proposed versus actual.
Sorry, I panicked. I thought that was a typo.
No.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that we're gonna get more details about that.
Okay. Next slide. Because all tax abatements must meet a but-for threshold, the assessed value increase reflected in the previous slide would not exist without the support of the tax abatement. These investments bring residents investments in quality of life, like new and retained jobs, expanded economic vibrancy, a direct and indirect increase in assessed value, and investment in challenging sites. All right, next. So we'll start with our different taxpayers. Southern Knoll is a 31-unit affordable housing complex. Next. All Southern Knoll's units are affordable to households at or below an 80% average median income, which I will refer to as AMI from this point forward. At least 75% of the units affordable to affordable households at or below 60% AMI. 7 units are set aside as permanent supportive housing for individuals experiencing homelessness, just Shalom. 7 units are set aside for persons with developmental disabilities, life designs, and real estate improvements are complete and the property is 100% occupied. We find that this the staff recommendation is compliant with all tax abatement commitments. So this property is in its 3rd year of abatement at 98%. It exceeds the proposed benefits on the CF1 in capital investments, new employment, and salary. It is compliant with affordability requirements, and the assessed value is $699,500. And the staff finds this abatement to be compliant.
So just to clarify that attainment, that is not a judgment, that's just a factual outcome of the assessed value challenge that we've run before. So even the developer, in this case, on their SB1 made certain assumptions of what the assessed value would be. It comes in something lower than that.
So did they build less than they had originally proposed, or is that just what the way the AV came out?
The real estate investment, it was actually higher in this case. It just turns out that there's a lot of fluidity in trying to predict assessed value, and so you're going to see sometimes wacko relationships between both the original and the investment.
Union at Crescent is a 146 unit mixed affordable and market rate housing. No less than 70% or 102 units are allocated to households with incomes at or below 60% of the average median income. No less than 20% of the units are at market rate. At this point, all of the improvements are complete, and we find that this is compliant with the tax abatement commitments. To continue, next one, okay. Union at Crescent is in its 4th year of its abatement. It has met compliance requirements for capital investment and jobs created and has exceeded its salary requirements. The staff has confirmed its compliance with affordable housing commitments through hand, and the assessed value is $9.9 million and has attained 53% compliance. Overall, it raised salaries by a total of $20K annually and raised its real property by $7.2 million, and it retained all of its employees. So we find this compliant.
Were both this and the previous one, the Southern Knoll, were they both LIHTC projects?
Yes. Yes, I believe that's right. Certainly this one, I'm pretty sure.
So I'm really surprised that the assessed values estimate is off by that much.
Yeah.
So in the future, I don't know if this is possible, we might want to suggest that people making these proposals talk with the county assessor
Well, what's
to
interesting,
get some guidance.
we have
Because
actually
they can help with
approached,
some of the nuances.
we've approached the county and said, because it is actually pretty important for us to try to value.
Right.
So I believe it's not done here. It may not always be done in Indiana, but it is done in some communities where the assessor's office actually comes in preemptively to try to make a preliminary judgment. I think they just don't have the staffing to be able to do that here. But one of the things that certainly, if that can't happen, one of the things that can happen would be for us in our analysis to be able to go back, do this side by side. What was the original assumption? What's the actual? and try to come up with maybe a better rule of thumb. Now, mind you, the SB1 is not something that we fill out. It's not an assumption we make, but we can, if we do that analysis a little bit more thoroughly, we might be able to give guidance to a developer before they put their SB1 together that allows them to maybe have a little slightly more accurate number. And more importantly, we know what we're, potentially putting on the table in terms of public subsidy.
Urban Station. Urban Station is a mixed-use building with 7,000 square feet of commercial space and 148 bedrooms. No less than 15 bedrooms will be allocated to households with incomes at or below 80% the average median income. Rent for affordable units may not exceed 85% of the market rate, and the affordability is required to be in place for 99 years. Staff does not recommend continuing this abatement at this point because we have not seen a CF1 from Urban Station. They have not filed one. Next slide. Urban Station is in its 6th year of its abatement and did not file 2023, pay 2024 CF1. The taxpayer may petition to continue the abatement with a waiver of noncompliance and council resolution. However, at this time, we cannot recommend continuation of this abatement.
So let me clarify that then, just so everybody understands that this is not a small deal. The process that a developer can pursue, so we are saying they have not filed a CF1. We're not necessarily saying one way or the other are they in compliance, but without a CF1, it's impossible for us to recommend compliance. So what we are suggesting at this point is, and what the next step is in this case, is that a developer may appeal. So the first thing that happens is City Council then would not authorize the abatement for 1 year, for this year. If the developer appeals, the City Council has the ability through a review to either accept a revision, to be able to review their their status and perhaps make a judgment of substantial compliance, and then that could overturn the initial judgment. In the event that that is not the case, then I think there's a third appeal option or a second approach or second review that the council would make about the long-term viability of the abatement itself, whether it remains in place or whether it ultimately gets retired. So right now, what we're saying, and Larry, correct me if I'm wrong on all that, but what we're saying is we're not necessarily saying we just don't know, and so it's impossible for us to make a recommendation positively at this point.
So they're in year 6. Have they filed the CF1 in previous years?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And received abatements.
And so has there been any communication with the, I assume the city's reached out.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
it's we just haven't gotten anything back, so it's kind of hard to
They haven't responded to your inquiries at all?
No, they have not.
So my understanding of the process is actually what would happen, and Stephen can obviously correct me, is that once this goes to City Council, there's a certain deadline by which they can take a negative action potentially, but City Council would have to issue a notice to them, and then there would be a hearing on their compliance level. So it wouldn't be an automatic termination for a year. They would get a notice first, and then they would have an opportunity to come and present to City Council within 30 days of that notice. I believe it's 30 days, if not 45, but I think it's 30. To City Council on their compliance for this year and ongoing. So just before there's not a termination up front. There's a notice period, and they get. Please, Steve.
Have they said anything? What are they intentionally not filing the CF1, or are they going to get the notice if the council takes that step to say, oh, we just forgot? In which case, I think there's another option to waive non-compliance with some requirements by resolution.
At the I think it was in January, maybe it was February, I did send reminders to everyone to file their CF1s, and then we sent a second reminder for everyone to file their CF1s. As far as any direct contact or anything such as that, I have not emailed them directly. I have not spoken to them directly. So
One of the things we could do is I could give them a call ahead of the City Council meeting as well, and just see what their situation is. And
yeah, I would think that they would respond if they know they were going to be the subject of a hearing in City Council.
Yeah.
I mean, is worth repeating, which is our responsibility is not to chase down people and make sure that they're adhering to requirements that they are required to adhere to. We do it as a courtesy, reach out to them multiple times, everybody, so we're treating everybody equally. There's only so much, I think, from our perspective that I think, you know, we can and should do. So yeah, I mean, I think that their ability to come in and react would be helpful.
I have a question. In the past, when they did file, were they on time, were they late, or do we have any feedback?
It was under different ownership, wasn't it?
Well, so, there was a transfer in ownership, but even under the new ownership, they filed, I believe they filed on time last year, and the transaction, I think, of that property was a couple of years ago, so, I don't remember offhand, but ultimately, it was in, it was in, right?
So I have a question, and the chairman has the right to slap me down and say, see me after class, because he's the teacher here. But from a broader policy perspective, could we be in a situation where a developer is looking at, and could you bring up the previous slide for a moment? If a developer is looking at market rates versus the reduced market rates, is there a chance that someone's looking at that and saying, you know what, we'd be better off without the abatement and not trying to be in compliance and just going ahead and doing
Certainly.
a market rate? And I guess the question I have is from a policy perspective, and we don't have to get too deep into the weeds here now, but what's our policy response to that? And does that affect how we approach all this going forward? Does this make sense?
To follow up on what Malcolm's saying, if you see the affordability duration is 99 years.
Right.
So they've already benefited from 5 years of abatement. If what Malcolm is surmising is true,
And I'm not
what kind
suggesting
of a
that that's
clawback do we
necessarily
get for
what
the
they're
first
doing.
5 years
Yeah.
of abatements? See what I'm saying? Because they by taking the abatement, have basically said they're gonna do affordable units, and the affordability duration is 99 years. So what
Yeah,
kind of stick do we have?
So there are, so in certain abatements, and we can look into this one and circle back, but in certain abatements, there are clawback provisions, right? So someone starts to take the benefit, and we can talk about that. This is the case in another one that we wanted to discuss in greater detail. And if they don't fulfill over the period of time that they're supposed to fulfill, then there's definitely a clawback. I think we need to look. This was a very early abatement. It was 2016, 17. And it's not clear. We'll have to go back and check whether or not that clawback provision was in place. I think your point is well taken. We've tried to be tighter on that in more recent abatements, and it is possible, in light of the change of ownership. I mean, a commitment made by one owner sometimes does or does not carry the intent of that. Does not carry. Now, one other layer of control that we have on these is that our Housing and Neighborhood Development Department goes in and does their own compliance of adherence to the terms of the affordability, right? So they, in 2022, went and connected with this developer to at least for that time period, whether they were actually providing those, and according to the documentation that we have reviewed from hand, they were. So it's possible that this was an oversight. It's possible that they've decided not to file actively. It's possible that a lot, it's very hard to tell. But at this point, I mean, the bottom line is if we don't have what we need to be able to make a positive judgment, we're not going to make one to you.
So clawing back of the value already received is essentially the maximum penalty that would be
That's
possible, right? There's no other remedy other than clawing back.
Unless one is built into
the MOU.
MOU, right.
And then the affordability covenant, was it actually recorded in the deed?
That's typically how we've memorialized these, is we've done a recordable commitment for the affordability. I'll have to look on this one specifically. This was just before I started the city, so I'm not really sure. how this was recorded.
Because I remember
Okay.
discussing that
I believe that's
way back, and I thought that that was at least the plan.
That sounds familiar to me. I just can't 100% give you a certainty.
Okay.
If I find it, I'll let you.
I mean, I agree, we can't find them compliant if they didn't file the paperwork. Given that apparently they were fully compliant last year, my guess is it's an oversight.
Yeah.
And hopefully that'll be the case.
Yeah.
It's just a reminder, though.
But they'll have to sort that out themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah.
Following up similarly, I mean, the durational aspect of it seems, so that wasn't present in the first two we looked at with Southern Knoll and Union Crescent. It seems like you lose the tool from the abatement, the incentive after a certain period, or however long the abatement is. And if affordability is promised for decades into the future, is there another remedy outside of, like having to do with the covenant, for instance, the commitment? Is there another remedy outside of the tax abatement context for ensuring compliance with the affordability component, even though it was an aspect of the basis for the abatement in the first place?
Yeah, so I think what makes this different than Southern Knoll and Union and Crescent is that because by virtue of those two having that kind of state level low-income housing tax credit additional requirements, that an abatement only can hit 10 years, and then after that we kind of lose our leverage unless it's baked in as a sort of clawback provision. In the cases where you have those other mechanisms in place, that extends it out into the future. Doesn't necessarily go to 99 years, certainly. So that is a good question, which is what, in order for us, and this would be, I think, what Adam referred to earlier, in terms of policy decisions and becoming a little bit more sophisticated in how we get all of the protections that we want to have. There may be a finite amount of protection that we can do, but if it's something that we want to review and make sure that we have in place moving forward, that would be a helpful addition to what we've done in the past.
Was the amount of and I'm trying to remember the discussion at the time, was the amount of the abatement calculated based on the expected present value of the 99 years of the affordability, or was it calculated only based on the affordability for the period of the abatement?
So you mean the return on the investment?
Yeah.
The return on the investment, this is like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I believe that we did not run the financial, when we looked at the analysis, we looked at what the public investment was. We did not look at the return, the impact of the return on the investment on the suppressed rents over, because it was, it's almost impossible to do that.
But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, did you consider the affordability as a benefit from year 11 through 99
Yes.
in your calculation? You
So
did.
in this case, in the MOU, just pulling up the MOU that was done for Urban Station, it looks like the term of that MOU, which sets out the terms and conditions and possible the remedies that they'll have for termination, that agreement goes through December 31st, 2118. Potentially, and it also does have a clawback provision that if they refuse to provide the information or file appropriate information as required under the agreement, then we could potentially reclaim all of the tax savings that have been gotten so far.
That's helpful. Thanks. All right. Anything else?
So I would just reiterate for all of you, members of the public and the press, that it is not a negative judgment, it is a non-judgment. So this is not a determination one way or the other. We are just saying to you, we don't have the information yet. Hopefully we'll get it. Hopefully that this will all clear itself out. But at this point, we are just saying they did not file one, and therefore we cannot assert compliance.
Thank you.
All right. The Foundry is a mixed-use building with 13,000 square feet of commercial space on the first and second floor, and residential condominiums above, which are excluded from the abatement, possibly. The Foundry is in its fourth year of its abatement. It has exceeded its capital investment commitment and complies with jobs retained, exceeding new employment expectations and their respective salaries. Its current assessed value on improvements is $19,261,200. and we find this abatement to be compliant.
So, well, one thing that you'll note,
Yes.
which gave us a little pause, but, you know, and we are actually going to dig into this, but if you look at there's something that's sort of
Off.
weird about the fact that the real estate investment and the assessed value amounts are the way they are. What we believe is going on, and we need to dig into that, but I mean, first of all, it would not change our judgment because we believe that they are compliant. But we think that there are some parcels and some units being filed that we need to clean up. So we will be that were not intended, because this is, again, it's residential luxury condos upstairs and commercial space, and this was really targeted at the retention of the commercial tenant and employees. So we will be working with the county to ensure that if an abatement, and you know, with council's approval, if the abatement is upheld here, that it is applied correctly to only the elements of the building that are supposed to be abated.
On development status, could you explain the implication of the statement, given changes in technology, the company no longer plans to make the personal property investment related to this abatement? Because I don't see anything about personal property. on
They
this.
actually did have a personal property, that's actually a typo on my part. They had, I believe they were approved for personal property abatement, and they decided to forego it because of the changes of technology, so they will not be taking advantage of that abatement at all.
Nobody buys servers
Yeah.
anymore. That's what it is.
Nobody buys what?
Servers.
Servers
anymore.
anymore. Yeah.
All right. Hoosier Energy. Okay. The next abatement is for Hoosier Energy. Hoosier Energy actually filed its CF1 much earlier than the due date. So to comply with the 45-day review period, this abatement has already been presented to council and has been approved. This is just the review of our findings. Hoosier Energy holds a real property abatement for its LEED certified headquarters on the southwest side of Bloomington. It is in its 6th year of its abatement. It has exceeded capital investment and salary requirements and remained compliant in jobs retained, and its assessed value on improvements is around $9.1 million. And like I said, we have approved it already. So moving on, Woolery Mill. Woolery Mill holds a real property abatement for its development on South Keg Road. Its public benefit is renovating an abandoned limestone mill into a mixed-use facility. Woolery Ventures completed Phase 1, the event space, in May 2019. Woolery is in its 4th year of its abatement and is compliant with the abatement commitments. All right, and as you can see, this one did give us some problems. We did have a typo on the first SB1, so they are compliant, or I'm sorry, CF1, but they have exceeded their requirements on new employment and on new salaries. So. Okay. All right.
Had that one in an earlier draft been marked
Yeah.
as under
Yes.
review?
was.
It had been under review.
And that's
but
what I'm
we-
looking at right now.
Yes, it had been marked as under review. I'm sorry about that.
So just to explain, you know, we received a CF1 from Woolery, and we captured the information from that. What was weird is, so we have CF1s for last year, the year before, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we thought, well, this is kind of strange that they are claiming no employees when last year they claimed employees. The previous year, it was during the pandemic, and this is a event space, right? So it was, you know, which had sort of effectively shut down. So we reached back out and we said, we think you have mischaracterized your employee base. You need to go back and look at your CF1 and you need to make sure that it's accurate, which they got us a revised one this morning, I think. It's a different number of employees because it's come down from last year, but it is their updated CF1, so we scrambled a little bit, and that's why you got a revised version of the
Yeah.
presentation this morning.
Okay, but even with the decrease, they're still within.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Commitment.
All right. Catalent. Catalent holds 2 active and 1 passive abatement. The active abatements are 15-06 for personal property and 19-04 for both real and personal property. The passive one is 2206. These various abatements cover separate expansion phases and employee growth projections. The city's initial abatement was with Cook Pharma, which was acquired by Catalent, Indiana. Real and personal property abatements have distinct phases. CF1s report blended employment figures across abatements, and CF1 data reflects the total annual payroll and end-year headcount. Where am I on my slides? Abatement 1506 on personal property is in year 5 of 10, and new personal property investment exceeds SB1 commitments. The current assessed value is at $5.7 million. Abatement 1904 on real property is in year 2 and exceeded capital investment commitments. Abatement 1904 on personal property is in year 3 and exceeded SB1 capital investment commitments. The current AV on improvements for 1904, both real and personal property, is around $85 million. We can go to.
Wait, so that new real estate investment 0.
Yeah.
Alex, can you admit the person that's?
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, what does that mean that they committed to invest $10 million in real estate and they've invested 0, but yet?
They're compliant.
I think that's a typo. Is Adam?
Well, and the real property
Yeah,
is.
Wendy.
Oh, Adam's here. He can take care of that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that. It caught my attention as well. It is not, that is, the CF1 is as reported at face value on the CF1. The CF1 did not provide a cost update on the investment, but when you look at the real property assessment, it was indicative that investment had been made. So this was more of a function of the form did not include a data point on that. It's not saying that there was no investment. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, if it's worth $26 million, then there's been some investment made.
Right.
That's exactly right. Yes, sir.
And then, we've had discussions with Adam that it is, the form doesn't necessarily, it's not really conducive to filling out necessarily properly. There aren't data points that would be useful, so there is some, that's why it makes it a little bit difficult kind of assessing some of these things and why we're having Adam look at these and kind of assess these values for us.
In a similar fashion, the RP assessed value is 0 and the commitment on the SB1. And I can't imagine we approved a real estate abatement when they said they weren't gonna do any, they weren't gonna have any assessed value. I mean, I don't understand why there's a 0 there.
Yeah.
This is very confusing.
Well, I think, again, it's self-reported. Sometimes, and Adam, do you have the SB1 in front of you? Is it a non-entry or a $0 entry?
This is 1904. Let me double check.
Yeah.
How does this square with last year's numbers?
What's that?
How does this square with last year's numbers? It looks like we had listed, last year they reported 119.8 million in real estate investment. But it also listed the new real estate investment being approximately 40 million.
Hold on just a second.
So Adam?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it here.
So, I believe in last year's presentation, the real property and the new and this is broken up a little bit differently than last year. So, if you're looking at how we assessed the numbers last year, some of these numbers were combined, and so this is a separation of some of these numbers, which is probably why it looks like this. I'm trying to find specifically the other.
Okay, I think I have it as well here. And from what I'm seeing on this SB1, it was, there was no assessed value listed on the SB1.
Yeah. The SB1 that was received on May 18th, it should be stamped May 18th on the top of it.
SB1, not CFO.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So at the time of the original SB1, it appears as if there was no assessed value projected.
Yes.
We would have probably analyzed, created our own valuation for it based on the assumption set, like we've talked before. So I think in the presentation to all of you, if we were to go back to that and the presentation to council, my guess is that we would have run those numbers ourselves, as opposed to relying on their assumption.
So maybe this is unfair to say, but when I'm looking at the data, I want to see I would like to see the commitment and the compliance to that commitment. And the commitment would be, I would think, what the EDC made its decision on.
Right.
Right? And we're not getting that data from what you're telling me.
Well, we
Because-
haven't even seen the employment or the salaries, which is
Yeah, but
generally what we.
I find it
what we
very
base
strange that you, never mind, okay.
Well, I
We
think
can talk
to
after.
address that, no, but I think you're right to bring that up. The reality is there's a difference between what's actually happening and what's submitted on forms, right? Now, on the CF1 form, if it's submitted, that's them certifying formally about the outcomes of their investments, and that's what we look at. At the time of the commitment, they are saying, and we are putting in place an agreement such that they are committing to a certain capital investment. Whether or not they capture that assessed value, projected assessed value associated with a capital investment, to some degree is not necessarily meaningful. Because
among other things, they don't control it.
they don't control it, it's an estimate. We don't necessarily anchor our decision. What we anchor our decision on is, are they making the capital investment? Have they made the capital investment? And then at the time of the CF1, are they actually certifying formally that they've actually made that capital investment? So it's a little, so you just have to understand the
I
difference.
understand that.
Yep.
It's just that it seems strange to me that somebody will say they're gonna make new real estate investment of X number of dollars, and they have zero value for assessed value.
Right.
That just doesn't make any sense to me, because real property is going to be assessed at something greater than zero.
Right.
So that raises a red flag. I mean, I just don't understand. I understand it's not gonna be perfect, but, we saw it on some of the previous abatements, but zero doesn't make sense. And then conversely, you have new real estate investment on the SB1, and the compliance, the CF1, and we already talked about this, comes in at zero. That doesn't make any sense to me either.
Right.
Right? So ultimately, I'm comfortable the Catalan's made good investment. I mean, you can drive down the road and see that. It's just that if we're asked to look at these data and say compliant or non-compliant, I'm struggling with it.
Yeah.
Because the data's not driving that decision.
Yeah, it might work better to have a non-applicable as opposed to a zero.
Well, that's what I think is probably, it's not a $0. I can't, again, we'll have to go back and
Right.
double check the documentation, but I think it was just a field that was not filled out.
Right.
I mean, we'll talk about the new abatement, the pending abatement, but despite all of this, it's important to recognize that in all of these cases, but in particular in the case of Catalan, the abatement has been wildly successful, right? The takeaway, the key takeaway on these active abatements is they committed to making capital investments. They far exceeded that. The employee growth associated with these investments far exceeded, what was supposed to happen. They have grown fourfold, in part as a result of the increase of the investments. And this is exactly what we would want to see in the case of a tax abatement. So, I mean, I think it's really important to understand that.
Right.
Are there challenges? Yes, in the process, and in fact, that being able to vet more aggressively the inputs up front, or determine what exactly needs to be based on, and also making sure that we have correct filings at the time of their compliance.
Alex, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's just that if you're going to present an economist data, the data needs to make sense, and the data on this page just doesn't make sense to me. Right?
What
It doesn't tell the story. So I'd hate to see somebody take that and put it out, and they could take one cell in there and say, well, and not understand that, geez, there's zero RE investment on the CF1, but the real property assessed value is 26.3. So obviously there was some substantial real estate investment. Right? I know that, but some other people that don't understand the property tax system may not understand that.
Where are we pulling information for the presentation from the SB1s? Are we relying on what was previously documented, or do they self-report that as part of the CF1 filing? Like, where's the data field?
No, the SB1 is what was done up front.
Right.
So that is, once it's filed, it's locked, right? Unless there's any kind of revision against it.
Okay.
But you're asking, are we pulling this off of like the what's the mapping system where you can look up the property
GIS.
taxes?
Yes.
Yeah, the GIS. Are you pulling what the numbers that are in the GIS? Is that what the CF1 is? That matching up with the CF1 for
More specific.
whatever the real property is?
I can take that one, Alex, and
Okay.
if you'd like me to. So to be certain, the SB1 columns of commitments are face value of what those initial documents were. And the CF1 is a fusion of the self-reported compliance reports by the taxpayer, with the exception being the assessed values. The assessed values are pulled independently from the county's GIS website, and those are the improvement assessed values that match up to the proposed project assessed values were listed on the SB1, and they are in the 2023 pay 2024 assessments, which aligns with the abatement deduction that is being considered in these hearings.
Right.
So, I'm sort of looking at the SB1, the original SB1 for the 19 abatement, and I mean it's a terrible form. The SB1 is a terrible form. Let's just say that. We've had those kinds of issues with the county as well. It just doesn't necessarily make sense. But I mean, what they say here is they have current value of 43.8 million. Then plus their estimated value of proposed project is 40 million.
That's estimated cost.
Oh, right, the estimated cost, which is what I would think you'd put in that,
investment field?
Investment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Real estate
Is
investment.
that personal
Right.
property that you're
So
reading?
I think new real estate investment should be 40 million.
Right.
And
Yes.
then assessed value should be 10 million.
Right. Based on the SB1.
That's what they put in their SB1.
Yeah.
40 million?
Yeah, the actual real estate commitment was 40 million, so substantial compliance would have been 36 million at this point. For personal property, it was 85 million, that's correct, it would have been 76.5, substantial compliance. And then that 10 million looks like that's in the assessed value column from the
Right.
SB.
Which we all acknowledge is just a guess anyway, the assessed value.
Okay,
so.
Adam, did you get those?
I am hearing that. I have a copy here that is different than that. So I think we should likely take that offline and circle back. I have a SB1 real property for that resolution that shows only 10 million of estimated values of proposed project and no assessed value.
Okay.
I think there's some sort of discrepancy there.
All right, we will clean that up. It sounds like there might have been a revision at the time of the approval or whatever as we were doing that, but.
Alex, can I say something?
Yeah.
Sometimes if that was going into an existing structure, this build out, so sometimes when you're coming into something, if it wasn't called out initially, sometimes it can be interpreted, you're filling that out, there is no assessed value on that particular build out. That's why sometimes it registers as 0, and then after, the reason why you get the 26 million on that is after the CF1, after it's went in, the build out is done. So sometimes I've seen that before too, just on how that's interpreted on that side. So that may, because it wasn't there existingly, and maybe on a prorated basis, if the structure itself assessed out, you really have to kind of say, what's that work out on a square foot, and then plug that in.
And that maybe is what we had to go back to them with, if there are two SB1s. So we will validate this, certainly by the time we get to council, and we will communicate with all of you the feedback. I think bottom line, as far as we're concerned, we know that work's been done, we know that job growth is there, we think that this is a very positive and significant investment that's being made, so we would recommend compliance to you. And this is the manpower, so I can speak to this if you want.
Yeah.
So one of the other challenges that we have is that is how to think about incremental manpower when it comes to, they have aggregate manpower growth. How do you attribute that specifically to individual fields? So what we're looking at here, even though we are, looking at the original resolutions, on an aggregate basis, we're looking at the cumulative job growth over these two resolutions, which, as I was saying before, is considerably successful. So we feel like from a manpower perspective, even though it's hard to untangle sometimes, is this person working under the auspices of that particular resolution, we think on an aggregate basis, this is a significant job growth, well beyond what the expectation was.
Congratulations.
And these are the corresponding salaries for that.
Maybe I shouldn't say this, but even with the recent layoffs,
Well, that brings
if you add
us.
those up, you still end up with
Compliance.
compliance.
Yeah.
With you looking at the consolidated numbers. Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll get into the pending
Yeah.
separately.
Well, wait, so, I'm sorry,
First
can we
thing
go
I
back to
thought of
the
was-
salaries then?
Are they still compliant?
The salaries.
Oh, I'm sorry, salaries.
I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly, that their actual average salaries are less than what they had originally projected.
So we actually, I did speak to McGuire, was it?
Sponsel, yep.
McGuire Sponsel, and asked for their actual monthly headcount and their monthly payroll. And when you take into consideration what they do at the year-end headcount against the monthly payroll, it actually works out to be about $66,000 a year per employee on average. These numbers are skewed because they're just like exact at a fixed point in time, whereas this is what's happening right now. So the 66,000 is more of what's happening right now. So in summary, personal property capital investments for 1506 exceed commitments. Real and personal property for 1904 exceed commitments. Cumulative employee growth significantly exceeds commitments. And the CF1 data reflects the total annual payroll and end year headcount. Therefore, staff recommends finding of substantial compliance for Catalent across all abatements.
So when I jump in here, those are all the active abatements. We're moving away from active abatements, and now we're talking about pending abatements. So the first one, because we've been talking about Catalent, we start with this one. So as you know, in 2022, Catalent approached us and we recommended to you, and then you recommended the council, an abatement that had essentially three different requirements. a clawback provision was embedded in that structure. And the 3 requirements, actually technically 4. One was a real estate investment, one was a personal property investment, 10 million and 340 million, which was a pretty significant investment commitment. A net new employee count of 1,000 on top of the number that was there, and then new salaries of 66,560,000 against those. So those were the components of the abatement that we presented, you recommended, and were ultimately approved. The current situation is that Catalent has had 2 significant layoffs, employee actions over the last 7 or 8 months. One is
That's recorded.
Without your mic.
You may say
He
thank
took
you.
advantage of the fact that.
Yes. One is a
Mic drop.
mic drop. So there were 2 employee actions, one in November and one this year. We have been working closely with Catalent. To their credit, they were very engaged with the city and other partners in terms of communicating in advance of what was going to happen. So we had a pretty good idea. We have an understanding that they are making capital investments. So the capital investment side is in progress, and they have had substantial capital investments and will continue to do so through 2023. It is our understanding that those will be substantially, if not at the levels that were originally anticipated. The employee side is the one that was challenging to them. From what our understanding, and certainly what we've read in the press, that they had a certain inefficiency as they built up during the pandemic. So they had not only a kind of elevated headcount, but they also had to bring them on so quickly and introduce them into the system so quickly that it was actually inefficient. So they but as that volume has decreased of pandemic-related actions, they retooled and have become more efficient. So it is a very hard thing when employees lose their jobs. We understand that, and a lot of work was done in November and is being done now to try to land those employees in a way that is as easy as possible, and so that they can find alternative employment. The stabilization of the employee count, which is roughly in that 2,600 range, following the most recent action, Catalent believes that is a very efficient and sort of well-constructed manpower count. The question is, will they ever add another 1,000, right? In the period that the tax abatement calls for, which was the end of 2026. And the answer is it's unknown, right? It's unknown whether or not those additional manpower would come online. So, number one, Catalent is not filing. In this case, it's a deliberate non-filing of a CF1. They don't want to trigger the beginning of a tax abatement because they know they're not compliant. They could actually get the benefit of it, but then the clawback would come into effect. And so from a liability perspective, they would prefer at this time, given the structure of the tax abatement and the commitments that they've made for that tax abatement, not to file a CF1, not to get the benefit, and not to then be susceptible to a clawback. Theoretically, we could shut the tax abatement down. It would be our recommendation not to do that because it doesn't gain us anything.
And they haven't benefited from it.
They haven't benefited from it, but it shuts down, an option whereby in the unknown future, there's a possibility that they could actually meet their commitments by 2026. So what we're saying to you right now is this is pending. We don't actually advise any action on it right now, and we would recommend, at this point, just kind of standing still and letting this thing ride.
So can we clarify, the abatement's a 10-year abatement, is that correct?
There are 2 components. You have a personal property and a real property. Personal property is a 20-year abatement.
So when does the question I was getting at, when does the clock start?
When they trigger it.
When they trigger it. So if,
So they will see an assessed
so
value.
if 5 years from now, things turn around for them, they have a abatement sitting there for 20 years?
For the duration of the, there's actually an underlying ERA period of time.
Okay.
So that sets the broad parameters within which the abatement can exist, but they can sit on it for a certain amount of time. I think there is that window, Larry, I think it was 10 years in addition to the duration of the,
There's a window of time, but then there's also the MOU, what they've agreed to in terms of substantial compliance, and there is a hard date on that, as Alex noted, which is, the end of 2026 is when they have to start substantially complying. So they can't wait forever to trigger it, because then they're still gonna be out of compliance no matter what they do if they try to trigger it later,
I'm just thinking back at Woolery, where.
yeah. And that had to actually be renewed. Those
Right.
windows
Right.
had to buy
So
people.
that
long
may be
before
the
they-
case here.
But in this
It's
case, they're
feasible.
actually paying the tax on this.
They're paying the tax.
Presumably
And-
this
and they're
AB is
No,
going
no,
out.
no, I understand,
And,
I understand,
yeah.
I'm just.
Yeah. So this is a much more active, non-submission of a CF1 than.
I was just curious about
Yeah.
the mechanics of how that would work. Thank you.
So that's the Catalent. Any questions? I mean, it's pretty complex. You got multiple abatements and, obviously changes along the way.
Do you have a sense of how much of the committed investment has been made yet? Like, is the building 100% done? Is it 50% done?
We have gotten indications from their firm. We're trying to get as concrete information as possible. I certainly not 100%. I think they're on their way. I think they're intending to make capital investments in 2026 to complete that project. And we are really trying to lock down those numbers. And, to some degree, if they're not triggering, it'd be good to know. We'll know what the assessed value. So from a real estate, this is primarily a personal property real estate, not a real property. So our assessor only does the real property. The personal property is self-reported, right? But both come across our desk. So we're going to have we're going to know what the assessed value associated with that is in the years ahead. My understanding broadly is that they still have some capital investments to make in 2023 under the original 350 assumption.
Anything else? Got another slide.
And then,
Yep,
then the last pending one?
We have 2 more slides left. Real America is also pending. This was approved in 2021. They're still under construction, and I think under our advisement, we.
They haven't filed,
They
right?
have. Oh yeah, they haven't filed. They haven't even triggered the abatement yet. They're still under construction, and they're having some difficulties with that. So we'll see. Hopefully, we'll see.
So there were
something
delays in
next
this
year.
project. They ran into, so the site, which is the former Night Move site, is a former dumping ground for limestone that came off of the limestone cutting facilities that used to be right along Switchyard Park. They ran into that in their construction process, and it delayed somewhat significantly the schedule for the development. But if you drive down there, you'll see there's an elevator tower built. Certainly project is muscling forward to the extent it can, and yeah, we'll see where that goes.
Did they know that it was a limestone dumping ground at the
I
time?
don't think anybody knew. They even did samples. They took samples, and until they started digging, they didn't know. So.
They managed to go between them.
Well, that's actually literally what I think what happened. When you do
course
that,
between them, and then
if you're
started
cold.
thinking, oh,
Yeah.
So we think this is a great project. We think it was definitely a good recommendation to support it. We do understand that there are a couple of things. One is that particular construction issue, and then there's obviously the rising cost of construction that also impacts all of the stuff that's happening around here. But in this particular case, the strategy for supporting it was that is one of the most visible, important sites along the new Switchyard Park, which is a great asset, and we wanted to provide affordable housing for people near that amenity. The market would not have yielded naturally affordable housing, so becoming involved in it from a land value and a tax abatement perspective made sense to us.
All right, and then the final slide. Other activity this year, or I'm sorry, in 2022. In January, real and personal property abatement for Catalent LLC was passed by the Bloomington Common Council in February of 2022. compliance on or before December 31st of 2026 at $315 million in real and personal property investment and 900 new full-time jobs. June, approved project expenditure and financing agreement for citywide fiber internet with Hoosier Networks LLC, Meridium. Part of the creation of a new tax increment financing district, or TIF, for business property. October, recommended issuance of economic development revenue bonds for the renovation of Country View Apartments, 2500 South Rockport Road. Renovation of a 206-unit affordable apartment complex receiving Indiana Low Income Housing Tax Credit, or LIHTC, and Rental Housing Tax Credit, RHTC. And that's it for us. Thanks so much. If you have any more questions for myself, Alex, or Adam, we are more than happy to take those.
Go ahead.
So are you wanting a recommendation then from us today, a voted recommendation?
Yeah, so our hope would be, certainly, we need to get back to you on a couple of things in terms of just the forms, clearing up the SB1.
Like the material, though.
What's that?
They're not material.
Yeah, and
To
the
the-
material.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope,
Taking a motion.
I would recommend that, given our recommendations, so with the exception of the urban station one, which again is not negative judgment, it's just a non-judgment at this point, that we would ask you to consider EDC's recommendation to advance this, which may take a slightly different form in terms of restacking the numbers to make sure we have it right according to SB1s, and then we would bring that to council on the 14th.
And so do you want a negative recommendation on urban station, or just not to include it in any recommendation?
Recommendation is stated.
My recommendation, so I think really what you're approving here is approving the report as given. So it include that non-recommendation to council, just drawing their attention to what's going on with Urban Station. In the meantime, we'll try to gather some data to give council an update during that meeting so that they can have a fuller picture of what's going on with Urban Station. But that seems to be what was included in the report, so that would be the vote here, I think that's.
Can I clarify, going back to urban station, what then the recommendation to the council would be, and what courses of action? It sounded like there was the option to trigger like a legal notice in 30-day period for appeal, and that would be probably the staff recommendation. Is that right?
Potentially, since there's an ongoing question about what's the most recent status with them and whether we could call them and kind of get a sense, we would want to do that ahead of that before making that formal recommendation to you. Of course, that's actually at the prerogative of City Council itself as whether that notice gets issued, so that would have to be part of that discussion that night.
And I think we would want to recommend a less harsh, definitive, at least initial step, largely because we did do, in working with HAND, understand that, at least according to the compliance documentation they submitted in 2022, they were appeared to be meeting their commitments. So we do hope that is a filing oversight, and that they can come back and appeal successfully. We just don't know.
Okay. Sounds good.
Well, you want a motion for the adoption of the report with the flexibility to make corrections.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion passed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I just do want to reiterate, Dee has done a tremendous job putting this together, a lot of work. Nobody is born knowing how to do a tax abatement presentation. Well, so I don't want to speak for all of you, but certainly we weren't. So it takes a certain learning curve. And also, not to disparage other communities, but I think that, there are a lot of communities that kind of rubber stamp these things, right? And don't even look at them, which I think was a little shocking to hear, but we are certainly not doing that. We are trying to scrutinize these to the extent that we can, if we have the correct filing information. We appreciate the EDC's support of these tax abatements. Like I said, I think in almost every case, with the exception of one we don't, the one we don't really know about, it is a very effective way to get the outcomes that we're trying to get. In some cases, in affordable housing, flying against the face of what market would ordinarily yield. In other cases, bringing some public support to really drive job growth and capital investments. So we will look forward to coming back to you with the analysis that we intend to do between now and probably the end of the year, looking at a much more detailed understanding, policy decisions that we might recommend to both EDC and council when it comes to tax abatements. But for the time being, we think this is good. It's getting what we intended it to do without really putting us at a tremendous risk relative to the investments.
Next item on our agenda is business or general discussion. Anything for that? So D, I think we have on our calendar a meeting for June 13th that no longer.
That no
lives.
longer exists. I'm
We'll take
sorry.
that- we'll take that.
No. Would you be kind enough to retrieve
Remove
that?
it?
Retrieve that.
I will
Just so
remove that
everybody's-
from the calendar
just so
for
everybody's
sure.
calendars.
You guys are off the hook, sorry. But no more
When is the
emails
next,
for
the
me.
next calendar?
The next one is July 14th. I don't know, my computer shut down.
And we'll be in touch in advance about that if there's no
there's-
really new business. We've done the key cleanup, the cleanup of the minutes, the officers, and this presentation. There may be tax abatements coming along. We're not sure, but we'll deal with that in advance of that
I
meeting.
just want to make sure that you're all right with, if there's no business, that we don't hold the meeting. Is that right? Because that's what the decision.
I was not going to be around. I'm out of town anyway.
No,
so-
I'm just saying that's been the standard.
Yeah, it would be July 18th if we were to have any business.
And
But
I'm-
at this
I'm gonna be out
juncture,
of town then,
yeah,
too,
at this
so-
juncture, I see no business, so.
All right. Anything else? Then we are adjourned.
All right,
Thank
thank you
you.
all.
Thank you.
Yeah.